I don't know.
Testing 1, 2. Yeah, well, there you go. We're ready.
All right, this is Kristopher Dahir, and he's on our teaching team, and one of my favorites because he's got so much energy and so different than me. But I love listening to you.
Oh,
Have fun. God bless you guys.
Well, it is good to be here with you. We're going to continue in, today I get to actually kind of cover Daniel. Now, that's a lot to do, but I'm going to talk about the character of Daniel and who he is and kind of what are we looking at in this man. Now, one of the things I want to just encourage us is this is just a man. Now, a lot of times we read these Bible heroes and we almost think they're like superheroes. Like, you know, it's like, Daniel, do you hear all the stuff he did? Or you can go through, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and you're like, these young men were just heroes. They were in a sense, but they're no different than heroes like you. And so they lived a life regularly that was pretty amazing. And so, I mean, obviously, there might be times we feel like this, but have any of you guys actually been in a literal lion's den? Because if you are, I'm going to sit down and listen to you speak, because that's pretty amazing. And we haven't. We don't have that happening. But this is a story out of the Bible that we're going to get to today a little bit and kind of hit on. But if you want to hit the next slide, we're going to really touch on what his life was built with. Character, purpose, and conviction. And it was interesting. I'm going to point out somebody in the room, and I say that because in my life, a lot of you guys know I was called into ministry when I was about 8 years old. That sounds really weird, and does that really happen? Well, in the Bible it does, and in my life it did. But there's a guy here who was there during those years, not just my mom, but Dan. He went to church with me at CLC back when I was a young man, and he was excited for Jesus, and I was just a kid. My father was leading worship. My mom was working at the church and all that stuff, and it was interesting. He came and prayed for me. When I thought about living with purpose, living with character, we really just get to live this life day by day by day. So thank you for your prayers. But it's also just amazing to know that if you think back over your life, I don't know when you gave your life to the Lord or what age you are now or what your life holds, but I guarantee you've had your moments where your character was questioned, where your purpose was questioned, and your conviction, maybe even you even lost it for a time. I'm going to challenge you today to not let Daniel be the only one with conviction. It cannot be. It cannot be. You have to hold on to this. And you can't let him be the one that lives with purpose, because God created you with a purpose. And I'll tell you this, and I could probably just preach on this and not just Daniel, but if you live this life without purpose, this Christian thing makes no sense. Okay, if we try to live the morals of what our society says and have some form of character, it makes no sense without serving God's kingdom, because it only reaches so far. But when you mix that with God's presence and who he is and what he has for you, it changes everything. His word changes everything. Amen? I'm done. That's all I have to say. I'm just kidding. We're going to go through Daniel a bit and some of the attributes and adjectives you've learned. I want to ask you, what are some of those? What are some things? We've been talking about Daniel for a while, and you guys, some of you you've heard different people preach it, share it, some of you've read through it. What are some things? Ready, go. Say it real loud. Integrity, conviction, obedience. Say that louder. Courage. My wife's speaking. I got to hear it. Consistency. Oh, yeah, very much so. Anybody else? Self-control. There's so much we could go through here. And I'm gonna list a few of them. Maybe you guys are thinking these. But he was not defiled. That's one of the things that's interesting. Now, he was human. I will bet that he had some forgiveness here and there because he was human. But he was focused from what we see. Focused. You guys ever walk down the road and all of a sudden you get the squirrel moment? Right? Our Doug does it all the time, but truthfully, we do that. We're running down the road and all of a sudden we look over because whatever, a donut or whatever is sitting over here. He was favored by God, is what it said. And it was noticed not just by God and by Daniel, but by the people surrounding him. Matter of fact, sometimes that made him jealous or angry and caused problems in his life. Sometimes it was good. He was strategic. He was a prayer warrior, and we're going to read about some of that. He thanked God. He was grateful. Now, I want to pause there for just a second, because one of the attributes that I want to tell you about him is he knew how to stop and thank God. I don't know that we always know how to do that. Because as soon as we're done praying for one thing, and God answers, what do we tend to do? God, thank you for that. Now I want this. Now I want this. And I'm still hungry again. And by the time we got that done, I need this, and I need this, and I need this, and I need this. And if we're not careful, he's a genie in a bottle to us and not this all-powerful God that we come and worship and walk with. He was humble. Now, I could spend a whole teaching on this, but he was submitted to God. And just know that. You know, a lot of times people think humility is some weak thing. You walk in, oh, he was so humble, and he's going to break. They're fragile. He was not fragile. He was not fragile. He was strong, but he was submitted to God to speak and go where God called him to go. I guarantee there was more things that happened in the kingdom that he could have stood up for or whatever, but he spoke when God told him to speak and went where God told him to. He was confident, available. That's a big one. He was available. And I'm going to be asking you, are you available to say yes? That sometimes is the difference between Daniel and us. Are we available when God asks you to do something? A lot of times we get stuck in our, oh, those people aren't going to like that. Oh, our culture doesn't talk like that. Oh, that must have been for the Old Testament times or for Jesus times. Are we available? Are we faithful to our friends? You're going to see a Daniel that was consistent, honest, spoke truth, and could not find wrongdoing in him, and unashamed. These are all very, very important things. But the key to this, you need to know, is he was just a human. He was not Thor, okay? I don't know who your favorite superhero is, but you know, some of us, we look at these different superheroes that come down and we're like, oh, look at them. And that's how we look at the Bible. Sometimes we think we can't do that. They're somehow like superheroes. No, they're just humans that we get to live out. So when I sit back and I look at this, what if Daniel didn't say yes? What if Daniel said no? What if he said, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to do that. And so as we kind of go through that, we're going to talk a little bit about that. So when I think of Daniel, he stood up to the culture of the day to honor his God with culture. Now, we talked about this. If you want to go to the next slide. Now, we're going to walk through this. This is a timeline of Daniel. Now, Dan and the other pastors have kind of shared a lot of these different things, but his timeline's pretty amazing. But you're going to see in the middle of these timelines, because it doesn't necessarily go chronologically in Daniel, he also, in the middle of this, was using his gifts. He was using that gift of prophecy. He was using that gift of being able to interpret dreams on a regular basis. Daniel was available for God in a lot of different ways. And some of this you're going to hear more in the next couple of weeks about some of his gifts. And it's important you understand he was available for God to use him and who he was. But to hit on Daniel chapter 1 just real quick, I want you to think about this moment, because in our day and age, you would consider Daniel to have an excuse not to serve God. He must have PTSD. Think about this. 15-year-old ripped from his family, they're probably dead because he was stolen and taken to a new kingdom. That alone would make us say, oh, you know, he's fragile, he's whatever. But that's not true. So he stood up during the time, he was like 15 to 20 years old. So he said yes to God. He said no to the culture. And I tell you this, he sat back, and the other thing he didn't do, he didn't look around and say, this isn't unfair. This isn't unfair. And he blamed everybody why he can't do it. Welcome to our age, right? We walk in this fairness thing that it's not fair, so we're not going to do this. And we don't stand up like we should. Now we already went through that, and that was an awesome piece out of Daniel 1. Now Daniel 2 and 4 talk about another time with King Nebuchadnezzar where there's this dream that's interpreted. And you guys have kind of heard these stories, but I'm just going to hit on them really quick. So imagine this. What's your name? Monica, would you come up here for a second? Monica, I want you to tell me what my dream was last night. And if you can't tell me, you're dead. It was about food. She has a good chance she's right. She said it was about food. Now, I want you to think about this. Even if God for a moment told her, isn't that still scary? I mean, even if you were like, all of a sudden God supernaturally showed you the taco I was thinking about, you still would be like, is it a taco? Or you'd be like, tripping out, right? A cookie, whatever. It'd be hard to speak. And not only would you die, but all of these people are going to die too. Exactly. And I want you to get this point. We read this almost like it's Daniel interpreted this dream. Isn't that cool? Superhero. No, it's just a human being. Thank you. Appreciate it, Monica. And so, as this kind of walks it out, you got to catch this. Now, why risk saying yes? Now, I want you to catch this. There was a lot of people that was being asked if you could interpret this king's dream. Daniel didn't have to come forward. I want you to know that. It wasn't like everyone pushed Daniel to the front and he's like, me? He didn't have to come forward, but God gave him this dream and he stood up. Now, here's the other thing, Monica. Here's the other thing. Don't get on your phone. I know you are. Come on. So, I'm just kidding. So, here's the other thing that happened. So, and this is important, is the king said, listen, I'm going to give you all this stuff, and I think you're amazing. I'm so glad that you can interpret this dream. You know what Daniel says? No man can do that. Only God himself. So he humbled himself, gave God the actual peace. He went and he didn't get in the way of God's glory, which we do that a lot. How many times do we sit back and be like, oh, we're there, and people are like, oh, you're so loving. You're right, I am. You're so right. You don't even know what I sacrificed to be at church today. It's snowing outside. Did you realize that? So you kind of put this together. Now, there was a second dream I want you to catch. Now, some of it you maybe don't realize this, but this second dream, the king didn't come. He just came to Daniel and said, hey, I had this dream, because he knew this is a gifting of Daniel, which obviously was part of his life on a regular basis. And he came, and check this out. He says, tell me, this is a dream. Tell me what's happening. And Daniel goes, no, I don't want to tell you. And the king says, don't worry about it. Whatever it is, it's going to be fine. He said, whatever this dream is, either hate you or should go to your enemy. That's how it starts. And king says, give it to me. And he pretty much says, you're going to die. You're going to be ripped from where you're at because of your ego, because of who you are. And within a year, that's what happened. Now, you may not realize this, but if you go talk to a king and say what they don't want to hear, what happens? Off with your head. It's not good. It's not good. And so, again, Daniel is in this place where he gets to stand up and serve. Now, it's not over. Daniel being called on again to interpret with this gift that God gave him. Now, this is where King Darius, another king, comes. And he has, all of a sudden, there's this writing on the wall. Now, part of it is because these guys are reviling God. God shows up, does this thing. And Darius goes and gets Daniel and says, what does this mean? And now, here's the other thing funny. At this time, you could almost see Daniel getting more and more courage because he's all, oh my gosh, again? What did you guys do to make God angry? Can't you just stop? He just kind of walks in. And it's funny because King Darius even says to him, hey, I have purple clothes, for a purple robe and gold. And he says, keep your gold. He even says it. I don't want any of that. But let me tell you what this means. And it's the many, many tekel person. Because God has numbered your days. You have been weighed and the balances have been found wanting. Your kingdom is going to your neighbors. You're done. And he's saying it's just what it is. And that very night is what had happened. So he's getting this courage to speak for God in those things. But again, he keeps finding himself in these situations. And at some point, I don't know about you, but you might say, dear God, what's going on? But he was walking in his purpose, in his conviction of who he is. Again, a normal human. A normal human. Just you and me are just like us. Now let's go to Lion's Den. Now I'm going to sit here just for a second. And I know you've heard some of these stories, but I want them to sink in. So Daniel was 80 years old. I have an excuse immediately to do nothing for God but maybe come to church. 80 years old, right? You've earned the right to do nothing. That's not true. This guy's 80 years old. God's using him and his giftings. I want you to know, I don't care how old you are or how young you are, and Daniel himself is a great example of that. Are you ready to be used by God with the giftings God's given you? Are you ready? Now, check this out. So he's 80. Now, I want you to know, this is very political in a sense because Daniel was one of three, and he was a governor a literal political governor. So he was there, and there's 120 others. They're called satraps. Now, that was a governor who oversaw land, and it wasn't, they call them wise men sometimes, but they really were just governors, politically kind of walking through. And so the king decided that Daniel's better than the other two even, and he's going to make him the second in charge of the whole kingdom, his whole nation. Well, like Pastor Dan shared last week, they did not like that. They became jealous, and they became angry, and they wanted Daniel to die, okay? So they wanted to find a way to get rid of Daniel. And they looked. What did they find? They found nothing. They found they couldn't find any wrongdoing, so they went after his good doing. That's what they had to go after. And I want you to catch this, because they went after the fact that they knew that he prayed every day. They knew it on his balcony. They knew they could catch Daniel and serving his God. Now I'm going to pause for a minute. Could this world catch you in serving your God? Just sit on that for a second. There are days, maybe. Am I consistent enough? I'd like to believe I am, but maybe some days I'm not. I want to be a man who consistently serves God, that you could catch me in my right doing. Could we catch you in your right doing? And I hope you're convicted on that. No condemnation. I'm not here to judge anything, but let the Holy Spirit touch your heart with that, something for you to chew on. Are you walking in right doing where they could catch you enough that maybe your life would be on the line if necessary? So the king, they convinced the king to have a 30, just like our fast we just had, 30-day fast of all their kings. Now, this is a polytheistic community, very similar to ours these days, okay? And I say that, you may not think so, but people worship all kinds of gods in our community, especially themselves. So just know that it is a regular thing. It is not odd. And so this king comes and says, if you worship any other god, pray to any other god, any other king, because they believe they were gods, then you were to die. That's it. You're going to the lion's den. So satraps had it. They knew if they just went to the balcony and watched, they're just waiting for him. Okay, it's 11 o'clock. He comes at 11 o'clock, and Daniel shows up. Now, I don't know about you. All you had to do was go inside Daniel. You don't have to pray on your balcony. What are you, an idiot? You know they're over there watching you. They're like, it's clear. And he does what he always does, what he always did, because he didn't want to change it. He wanted to live in conviction with purpose, and he went and prayed on his balcony to God. Again, are we convicted? Do we have that conviction, consistency to live for God no matter what our culture says? This is the challenge. This is the Daniel challenge. More than anything, that conviction. Well, that's what he did. Now, he knew the decree had passed, and he was going off to the lion's den. Now, there's more to this that just gets me. Now, he goes to the lion's den. Now, the king is convicted. Now, check this out. Daniel's life convicts this king who made the decree. And even before he goes to the lion's den, the king comes, may your God whom you serve continually rescue you. This is from the king. His decree is that you're going to die, but I hope it doesn't happen. You're going to die because you worship someone else, but I hope your God saves you. Even a stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king's signet ring went on it, which shows that it's sealed and no man can open it. Oh, now here's the key. If you read it real clear, the king was hoping that Daniel's God would save him. It says the king fasted for Daniel. It turned. He wanted everyone else to fast for only one. So the king breaks his own decree. He starts praying to God himself. Save Daniel. Save Daniel. It says no diversions were brought to him that night. No wound, no food, no wine, no other things. He didn't sleep all night. And then the break of day, it says the king ran down to the lion's den. Now I want you to think about this. If you knew someone went to the lion's den, you and me right now, would we run down wondering if the guy lived? You'd be all, poor sucker, you're dead. Why'd you go to the balcony? What's wrong with you? right? We would, I don't know if we'd have the faith of a king who didn't even know God. Now, I say that again, no condemnation. I'm convicted myself. I want to live a life that honors God. And I want to bring that to us and say, are we living this way? And then the king even goes and speaks into this, to the lions in the sense, but Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God whom you serve continually been able to deliver you from the mouths of the lions? This king is ridiculous, however, spot on. Now again, I want to pause for a second, because how would you answer this? You have a king who just threw you to die. Someone wanted you dead. And I want you to tell you Daniel's response, but it would not be my response. Daniel says, may the king live forever. I'd be all, king, you suck. What is wrong with you? That's what he does. He says, may the king live forever. Can I say suck in church? That's a bad word. I don't know. Kids, cover your ears. But may God send his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me because I was found innocent in his sight. Nor have I ever done anything wrong before you, your majesty. I guarantee, because I've been wrestling with things my own self, when people spoke words against me or they said things that weren't true. In this season of life, I've really dealt with that. And man, when I say deal with it, there's a wrestle going on in Kristopher that doesn't always, I can't say that you found me innocent, God. Sometimes I just have to go be quiet because what would come out of my mouth or my text or my social media would be not so good. Because there was lies. People wanted to see me fail that were called friends. This is tough. This is real. He's not a superhero. He's just a man like you and me. And then it says the king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And Daniel was lifted from the den. No wound was found on him. I won't read the rest of the story because there's vengeance, and I have no idea what God wants to do in my life or the people. I pray for them often. But I want you to catch this. Daniel had dreams, visions, interpretations, prophecy, and he consistently allowed God to use his calling and gifts on a daily basis. Now, I want to talk about the moments and outcomes of Daniel's gifts. This is important because this is where, remember, he's no different than you. There were outcomes for his style of living, and there's outcomes for your style of living. What you choose to be, how you choose to do, what you have been asked for. Now, in this situation, Daniel said yes all these times, and his life measured up to a pretty awesome moment. He fought the culture. He stood for things. He put his life on risk. He didn't take vengeance. He didn't call the king a jerk, which is probably what I would have wanted to do. He didn't do that. And when it was all said and done, God was glorified in a way that I would love for God to use my life. Since King Darius wrote to all the nations and peoples of every language and earth, and all on earth. And he says, I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and have reverence for the God of Daniel. Wow. Just think of it. Could you imagine all the things you've lived through, and when it's said and done and you're 80 and you're living, that someone writes a decree because of your life, because of what you lived, because of how you lived, because you said yes to Jesus, because you said yes to his calling on your life. And then it goes on to say, for he is the living God. Now it changes here from Daniel's God to the king's God. This is a transition. He gives glory to God himself. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed. His dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. Wow. May we live a life that one day stacks up to where there are people who make decrees about God because you live consistently, because I live consistently. Now, again, I do think we look at these like, when I think of Daniel, they're almost like movie sequels. You know, you look at, and there was this, and then there was this, and then there was this that happened. But I want you to know, for Daniel, not every day was a lion threatening his life. Again, a normal person like you or me. He lived out his gifts. Now let's live out your gifts. Let's talk about that for a second. Daniel was just 15 to 20 years old when he began working in his gifts according to Scripture that we got to see. But what if today there was a structure built in your life out there that says you cannot worship any other God but that structure? And if you don't, you're gonna die. What would you do? Do you have the building blocks to stand for what's correct? I don't know if this will happen in our lifetime, but I know history repeats itself. But I'd also say I think history already has repeated itself. Every day we have idols that we choose to worship our God. We have our money. We have our own ideas. We have our government. You can put whatever you want in there, and if you're not careful, we choose to worship it. I mean, I challenge you. Do you watch news 50 to 60% of your life? You might be careful because you might find yourself staring at the wrong thing. If that's where your focus is, potentially that's where your worship is. So I'm not saying not to know what's going on in our country. I'm not saying we don't pray for those in leadership. The Bible obviously is very clear. But what do we do with our life? Who are we? Do we just go with the flow because we don't want to make any noise? Or do we stand up for what's true and right and willing to live with conviction? Do we stand for Christ and let the pieces fall where they do? I promise you, evil will continue to show its face for the rest of our days. No matter how long you live, no matter what age you are, until Jesus returns, we will see evil do what evil does. That doesn't surprise God. The question God has for us, but will we do what we are called to do? Will we stand and be who He's asked us to be? And we're not the same. Some of you will never stand on this stage and preach a sermon, and you don't need to. Some of you may not ever go over to Thailand like Dan's about to and go be what God's asked him to be. It's okay. Some of you may never worship up here and sing like my beautiful wife, and maybe you shouldn't because you scare us, maybe. Right? Right? We have all giftings and things God's given us. 1 Corinthians 12, if you follow along here. There are different kinds of gifts, but the same Spirit distributes them. You see, when you work in your giftings, you unite with the Spirit. There are different kinds of service, but the same Lord. There are different kinds of working, but in all of them and in everyone, it is the same God at work. Which means whatever your gifting, it is not better or worse than somebody else. It's united under what God has for you. Period. We don't do that, though. We tend to be like, ooh, I want to be cool like that guy. I want to be like her. No, you don't. You want to be you. We need you to be you and to seek God and find out what that is. It says, now to each one, the manifestation of the Spirit is given for the common good. To one there is given through the Spirit a message of wisdom. To another a message of knowledge by means of the same Spirit. To another by the same Spirit. And to another gifts of healing, but that one Spirit. To another miraculous powers. To another prophecy. To another distinguishing between spirits. To another speaking in different kinds of tongues. And still another interpretation of tongues. All these are the work of one and the same Spirit. And He distributes them to each one just as He determines. If the worship team wants to come up, I'm about to close. My question here, the whole reason we had this conversation is not to talk about Daniel. It's to talk about you and me. He was a man that lived in history, had no idea they were going to write about him, and we talk about him today. He just lived every day what was in front of him. With purpose, with character, with conviction. Are you willing to do that? Now, with that said, I think we'd all stand and cheer, yes, that's me, right? But I promise you there's homework to be done. What does that mean? I'm not going to answer all that for you because that's something you have to discover. God's going to show you that. And it takes time sometimes. But usually it has to do with loving the person in front of you. Rarely does it have to be with some huge discovery and all of a sudden you have a Superman cape on and you are, I am, whatever hero you think. Usually it's you kneeling down and loving a child, helping somebody up who's fallen, sharing something you have. But in the end, it's not you getting glory, it's God. Now I want to ask, what attributes are in your life? What attributes? Now, there might be some, as you're thinking, are attributes you're not proud of and you don't want to share right now. That's okay. That's part of your homework. You get to bring them back to the Lord. During this worship song, during communion, you get to bring them and say, God, help me with this. Work on this. Or maybe there's an attribute you're like, I want to see God grow that in my life. I can tell that's what he's calling me to. Matter of fact, maybe he's been speaking that to you through this whole series or this whole last year. Let 2025 be a year of discovery for you, and let it be a year of yes. Yes to what God has. Discover what God has for you. We can't tell you that. We can't. All we are is a witness. Whoever's preaching up here, we get to share God's word and we get to be a witness to what God's done in our life. Bam, we're done. That's what we get to do. If you think we have answers, you are crazy. We do not. Matter of fact, there's days I try to figure out my own life and I'm all, I don't know what to do. And you might think we're like somehow, we know what we're doing. I'm just a human like you. I'm just trying to figure out what to do next, where my feet go next, how to treat the next person who comes in my life, how to treat that person who backstabbed me, how to treat that person who I'm trying to figure out if they made me mad, sad, or indifferent. Right? Just like you. We all live it, but we seek God and we discover what he has. Now we're coming to communion. Now I want to challenge you in this. When Jesus says that his body was broken for you and I, it was also broken for those people who don't know him. Do you know that? It was broken for people who do not know him yet. People who live lifestyles who you don't agree with. People who have philosophies you do not agree with. People who voted in ways you don't agree with. This body was broken for them. So when we come together and we break this body, we say thank you, we're grateful, but then we're ready to go and share this with anybody who comes on our path. And then when we come to the cup, this represents his blood that heals. Heals. Now, the best healing we have, though we want to be healed in our body, it's in our heart and our soul. What we have going on in here. He heals in all sorts of ways, but I'm telling you, maybe you don't walk with a limp, but you might walk with a heart limp. It doesn't do us any good to go out there and say, you want to know Jesus like me, when your heart is hard and bitter as whatever, and they're looking at it and saying, no, I don't want to know the Jesus you're talking about. But when we go and we understand God's love, I promise you that is a love that you've discovered that this world wants to know about. I promise. So we're going to have communion and worship for a moment. Please take a moment and ask God, what do you have for me? What can you discover about him?